This is Inner Whispers, episode 12, and welcome. My name is Alan. I'm the host of the show. Format is I waste some of your time, but then I introduce April Crawford, who's a full-body, open, deep trance medium and a best-selling author, who will talk about whatever she wants to talk about. She rarely has been able to talk in the last 10 years, even to long-term clients. And then we'll talk to Veronica, who will come in, seconds after April starts to call her in. So I'm going to hand the phone to April.
Hi, everyone. This is my little time to talk to all of you, and I look forward to it every week because there's a lot of things that go on with me personally that I think might be of interest. We get a lot of people, I understand, that wonder about, past lives and whether they're real or not. And a lot of times we get questions about people and their children, where the child will be talking about and demonstrating, knowledge of things that they should know nothing about. And there was a kid once that did all this stuff about the Civil War, and it was completely accurate. So how would a 3 or 4-year-old child know that? I have my own personal experience. When I was younger, I would fly back and forth as a dance teacher for my mom. About once a month, I would fly back. And my brother had a daughter, of course, was my niece. And every time I'd come home, she would come spend the weekend with me. I would get in on a Friday, and she would come spend Friday night and Saturday night with me. We'd hang out. We'd do girl stuff. And one time when we were together, we were getting ready to go somewhere, and at the time, she must have been maybe 3.5, 4, and she had a toy called My Little Pony, this little doll-like thing that's a pony, and she was moving it around, and I said, I'm glad you like your toy so much. And she goes, yeah. She says, I like horses. And she looked me dead in the eye and said, well, you and I used to ride horses all the time together. And I looked at her and I said, well, no, I don't remember that. No, I don't think we did that. I said, I've ridden horses before, but I don't think you have. And she goes, oh, yes, I have ridden horses a lot, and I rode them with you. So it dawned on me that, okay, she's maybe, tapping into something. So I questioned her about it. We sat down and we started talking, and I said, so tell me about the horses. And she said, well, you and I used to ride in the hills bareback on 2 horses, and they were pintos. And I said, really? Well, how do you know that? She says, I know that. Don't you know that? Of course, I was like, why don't you remind me? Because my brain's a little foggy. I'm older than you. And maybe if you talk to me enough that you will refresh my memory, and I could have the same memory with you. So she went through this elaborate discussion about how we were in long dresses, that it was hard to ride the horse in the long dresses. We were barefoot. There was no saddles, and not even really a bit or a bridle. It sounded like it was just mainly holding on to the mane of this horse riding through the hills somewhere. And, of course, that wasn't my idea of a good horse ride. I was a little more traditional than that. But she said, we did it all the time. Don't you remember? And I had to say to her at the time, no, I don't remember, but thank you for telling me. And she kind of shook her head at me. I mean, this is like a 4-year-old little girl looking at me with these big brown eyes going, I can't believe you don't remember that. And I said, well, honey, I just, when you get older, you don't remember stuff so well. And she said, well, we did that. Think about it a lot. And I wish we could do that again. Do you think we could do that again? And at the time, it was not feasible. Nobody had a horse, first of all. And second of all, her father probably would never have allowed me to take her horseback riding, let alone, even get close to a horse. But she talked about that for several times as I went home. And I would go home about every month, to see my mom and help her. And I'd spend time with my niece. So I think that it's really important for anyone who has younger children and they start talking about that kind of stuff, that you should listen. because she had elaborate detail of what we did. And, of course, my mind, it was more mature. It had been away from past life things for quite some time. So she refreshed my memory a bit, but I never really saw what she saw. So I think that as adults and as parents, if your children start talking about a past life moment you had with them, you need to sit down and ask them about it. You need to let them know that it's okay to talk about it, that it's not just some fantasy they're making up. Because my niece would not have known about bareback riding. She would not have known about bridles. I knew for a fact that she had never even been near a horse, a live one. And she knew a lot of stuff that she shouldn't have known. So I think that everyone should, if you have children and they bring this stuff up, you should let them talk. I also have a nephew who, same thing. He had past life moments, and I'll share those as we move forward in all these radio shows. And I also should bring up, too, that my niece also slept with her eyes open. 4 years old, she would come and spend the night with me in my room. She would come, sleep in the same bed, and we would sit up all night and talk. And one morning I woke up, and she's asleep, and she was laying there, and her eyes were wide open. And I looked down at her, and for a brief moment I freaked out because I thought, oh, my God, she's dead. Oh, my God. And she woke up, and her eyes were blank, and then all of a sudden they came to life, and she's like, what? So I came to find out that my niece slept with her eyes open. And that indicated to me that she had a lot of psychic things going on, because who does that? And so I just want to tell all parents out there, or anybody, if you have a niece, a nephew, or a friend of a family that the child is demonstrating this kind of stuff, it should be encouraged. I encourage my niece to explore her spirituality. I still do. And it's a gift that does fade, because now that particular niece has grown up. She has a family of her own, and of course she doesn't think about bareback riding with her aunt anywhere anymore. But and I think if I were to bring it up to her now, she would probably have trouble remembering. So if you have a child and they're talking about these things, I would encourage you to have them be able to relate it to you and have it be a normal kind of discussion, not like, oh, that's cute, sweetheart. It's like, no, tell me about it. Because it's important as a culture, I think, to remember this stuff. And when they're young, they do remember. And as you get older, you tend to forget.
Okay. And now, as we wait for Veronica to enter the building, should take just a few seconds. And then I'll have a segue question directly related to what April just talked about. She's here. So, Veronica, a segue from April's conversation about her niece is that it seems like children under 5 years of old age are really connected, and if anybody's ever watched one, they got imaginations. They could play with a stick, and they think it's incredible. And they often talk about past lives. Some have been documented by people who started out as cynics. I mean, I'm talking like serious people, professors, psychologists. And when they got through with it, they realized that A, this is real, and B, that there's so much evidence documented around the world of young children remembering other places that they couldn't possibly know anything about, to the extent that the evidence would be accepted in a court of law. So I had a discussion with a fairly senior business associate of mine, and his theory was the reason people don't typically remember anything before the age of 5 was because they didn't have a developed sense of language, that it's the language that helps you remember things. And I told them I disagreed. So, and I thought of it more in terms of they're so connected, it's like a dream, and then once the connection's cut off or other stuff comes into play, that distracts them, that's why they start to forget. But I'd also like to let everybody here know that whatever your experience is doesn't mean it's everybody's experience. Some people say they don't dream. Some people say they don't dream in color. Some people say they don't remember their dreams. That's not true of everybody. And the fact is, there are people, even beyond the age of 5, who can remember their birth. So expand your minds. And getting back to my friend's theory about language, what do you have to say, Veronica?
We think it's utter nonsense that language should be considered in a past life moment. All of you have within you the ability to remember and even speak other languages. So, yes, a child's brain is developing, but if you limit it to language, then you're limiting it to the brain that they have, and they are expansive beings, aware of the multiplicity of their existence. We would heartily disagree with your associate and know that under the age of 5, even probably under the age of 7, the psychic openness of children, most of them, there are some who are not, but most of them, it's a wide open field. And that is why it should be encouraged that children, if they bring this stuff up, to at least talk to them like it's a real thing, not like some made-up cartoon character that's coming to the forefront.
Thank you, Veronica. And now for some questions from the comments, which I encourage everybody to participate in if you can. This is from Julia. Veronica talks about young souls and old souls. I want to know where the young souls come from, how the new souls are created, and who creates them.
There are source entities that put out and create what we call fragments that can manifest themselves into human form, Pleiadian form, all kinds of forms for experience and participation in evolvement. So we would say the term young soul, old soul, is basically for the linear mind to understand that there are some souls who have had more experience and some souls who might be recently cast and therefore don't have the same experience. It is a linear definition that is given that way. Ultimately, it's not that way, but if we're talking to all of you, we have to talk in linear terms. So that's why we say old soul, young soul. But ultimately, it is the evolution of the energy as it's cast from source. And then you will say, okay, well, what is source? It is a encapsulated, expansive energy that through collision of frequency creates a fragment that can experience linear or nonlinear existence with its own consciousness, and in that conscious moment becomes independent and therefore can evolve itself but send that evolution back to the source. Now, we know you live in a very monotheism kind of environment in this current moment. And it is important to some to say, well, there is a God, and God loves everyone. But we would say that there are many sources that could be considered godlike and sort of indicates what the differences are. Because all of you that are incarnate in physical form do that with the consciousness that you come from within the source. So you all come out very differently, and all of you have very different experiences. It's probably too complex to continue talking about it, but we do want to make sure that everybody understands that there are many sources that create fragments that turn into linear physical beings of some sort, not necessarily human, and not necessarily of this dimensional space or even of this galaxy or quadrant.
Well, thank you, Veronica. But since we've delved into source entities and we got tons of questions about them, I would like to also mention that I've personally spoken to about 17, I understand it's like 50 to 60 of them. And I always ask the same question as my test. Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate being tested. And that is, can they create life forms? And I remember, at least on one or two, I said, well, and they, of course, say, yes, they can do anything. Anything they can imagine, they can do and create. So the creation part is kind of important. And I'm talking about the planet, the galaxy. You know, everything that happened after the Big Bang was all created. But in the early days, first of all, I didn't even know about source entities until this 15 years doing it every day. Okay, and I had been talking to one or two of them, and they never said, "Oh, by the way, we're source entities." And Veronica never told me either, which is interesting in and of itself. But the question I always ask to find out if they qualified as a source entity in my book, right? Because causal plane entities can do a lot of stuff. But I always ask them, can you create life forms? And after they roll their eyes, they say, of course. But I ask specific questions like, if you wanted to have a dinosaur right now, could you do it in this time frame in my yard? They said yes. And I said, well, would you have to go, back in time and, create it and let it evolve into a dinosaur over millions of years? Or could you do it right now from scratch? And they said both. So anyway, I don't know. I tend to be long-winded about source entities. Maybe we'll talk about them a little later. However, I'm not sure how useful it is because they are so far out of here that they got a lot of stuff on their plate. Oh, well, here's another example. This was a minor source entity that I was talking to after a bunch of other ones in the same night. And it came in, it was very humble. Most source entities are not what I would consider humble, okay? And they take a long time to even talk to them and get a relationship with them. And in the beginning, they used to, about Veronica in third person, frankly. They thought she was wasting her time on this planet. But now, some of them say, hey, can we get in on this? We'd actually like to participate in what you're doing. But tough luck, Veronica was here first. So at the end of a long session we had, I'm talking a 4-hour in-person session, one swooped in and very humble. And it was like almost an afterthought. We were just, getting ready to wrap the session. And it said its specialty was creating planets. And I said, well, that's really interesting. And it said, would you like me to create one for you? I said, yeah, that would be great. And by the way, could you make it in the Goldilocks zone so that, humans could live on it and all that stuff? And it says, okay, 2 or 3 days, your scientists will make an announcement of its discovery. Now, this scared me because I don't like when any entity makes a prediction because of, with time and all the choice involved and everything else. I mean, Edgar Casey was wrong. I mean, so many predictions go right down the drain. So I didn't like that, especially since there was a client in the room. Anyway, 2 days later, they announced the discovery of a new planet in the in the Goldilocks. It was Galicia something. It kind of blew my mind, but even though I don't need validations, and I certainly didn't need them back then, it's still cool when it happens. Okay, so I was going to keep following up on this, but my iPhone just decided to turn off. So let's see. Okay, here's another question. Conrad, that he heard about a term called soul clusters, which I haven't ever heard about or used, but I get the gist. He said, I have felt a very powerful attraction to strangers a few times in my life, which seems to come out of nowhere. Are those likely from my soul cluster?
Well, we would probably use different terminology, which would be soul group. And yes, there are some inexplicable connections that happen. You can be on a train and you meet up with someone who seems like you, feels like you, and you have a lot of conversation with them on the train, and you feel like you've known them forever. They are most likely from your soul group, just having a different experience in this particular lifetime. Now, this gentleman used the word cluster. We would say it's more like soul group.
Thank you, Veronica. This next question or comment is from Maria Cortez. She says, hi, I grew up in a very religious background. My question is, and there are others, the one I picked is there really a devil? Oh, and then she follows up and says, I feel like it's a scare tactic to control people.
Well, we would say the young lady is correct. The devil has been created to personify negativity, and there is no such thing. Now, many who are deeply religious would run screaming from the room on this, but there isn't. Evil is in the hearts of men. There is no outside entity creating negativity in the physical reality. We think that over the years of history religiously on this planet, that it has sort of evolved into the provocative entity that causes man to act poorly. But we think man acts poorly pretty well all by themselves. They really don't need a devil kind of personification to push them into it. But it's really nice to blame it upon the devil, we suppose. But there is no such thing as a devil.
Thank you, Veronica. This next question is from Don. And it's, how do we recognize our departed relatives or anyone else after we leave our bodies, which I assume he means after we die and we're in the afterlife? What do we look like then?
When you are not in physical reality, you do have a memory of what you did look like in physical reality. And if you wish to portray that in the non-linear existence, you can. Or you can create another image for yourself, maybe from another lifetime. Maybe you like the accoutrements from another lifetime much better. But ultimately, the eyes are the windows to the soul, as most have said, and you recognize everyone by the frequency and how that frequency translates through the eyes, especially in the physical. In the non-physical, if they are portraying themselves in some sort of image, you still look to the eyes to find out who someone is on an energetic level. We would say that it's always the frequency. You run into someone and you feel a kindredship to the frequency. It's no different in non-physical reality. And you always recognize and remember a frequency when you come in contact with it. And that frequency will always project and portray who they've been, who they are, and who they will be.
Thank you, Veronica. This next comment and question is a comment. No, I guess it's a question for me, and then a question for you. And it's like, I love your work. I guess it's to all of us. Thank you, April, Alan, and Veronica. I love your work and greatly appreciate what you do. And that's from Paul. Question for Veronica. How are new souls created? And what energies create new souls? How is non-physical consciousness created? Is that all you want to know?
Non-physical consciousness is created by an intersection of energy. So let's say two source energies intersect. And in that intersection, there is a spark that comes from it that turns into a being that is separate from the source. It sounds a little bit like linear, and we're putting it that way so that most of you can understand it better. But energy is created by an intersection, always. And the physical part of it manifests, and then the non-physical part of it manifests. And comes a creation. It becomes a moment of adaptation to whatever surroundings the energy wishes to participate in. It is always a beautiful gesture. And any time two source-centered energies or two regular energies intersect, there is always great beauty in it and always a fond kind of awareness of how life is created.
Thank you, Veronica. And since we delved back into source entities, which is a lot of people ask about, here are my observations. One is, everybody is in some way, by definition, right, an aspect or a fragment of one or more source entities, which means a single source entity can create as many aspects as it wants, but sometimes they get together, and you can just think in your own terms. You have parents, right? Not just one. You have, 4 grandparents. I think that's all true, because I know of some that have been aspects of multiple source entities. And Veronica saying, okay, this is enough of this. Anyway, I guess that's the point. That it could be a single source entity. It could be multiple source entities that just get together for whatever reason. But it also could be other entities that are not, source entities are like the top of the food chain up here on the CEO, on the org chart. But there's a lot of other entities, that were created by source entities, which themselves can create aspects, just like you can create children. Okay, so even though I have an unbelievable amount more of content, it's now the part of that show where I say, message to the world, Veronica.
We believe that the most important thing in a world that you are all involved with is respect. It is an admiration of those who maybe think differently than you, act differently than you, and move about in their reality differently than you. It doesn't mean they're better. It doesn't mean they're worse. It means they're different. So it's important for each of you to be mindful of the respect that is needed for those who maybe not doing things exactly the same way you would do them. No one's right, no one's wrong. It's just that all of you do things differently. So we think in the culture that you're all involved with, it's very important to remember that daily, not just intermittently, but daily. And allow people to be who they are. Allow them to be different than you. And if you don't understand it, make it your business to understand it. Or if you don't want to even delve into the understanding of it, then just decide to respect it. And we think if every one of you just took a moment to do that, that there could be probably the epiphany amongst all of you that, hey, we don't need to be at war with each other. We need to just be respectful of each other. And let everybody live how they deem they want to live. That is true freedom. So we would say make sure you keep in your thoughts the concept of respect at any given time. Someone has a different opinion, you look at it and say, well, gee, I don't agree with that, but I respect your right to have that opinion. But I'm not going to embrace it because it doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't mean you have to clunk them over the head and cause them difficulty because they don't agree with you. None of you are the same. Not one of you. Every single individual energy is different. And to think that everything is going to be homogenized and everyone's going to think the same way is ridiculous. Never going to happen. So the best all of you can do is to decide to be respectful. You can disagree. You can have discussion about the disagreements. But if it's done with a respectful tone, then you can have it. If it's done with animosity and negativity, then no, you can't. So decide every day that you're going to be respectful. Doesn't mean you have to agree. Just means that you need to see the light in the other person, see the soulful energy of the other person, and love that energy. And decide that, okay, it's all right if they're doing something different, to do different things. It's not like you're all crammed into one little tiny arena. So decide every day to carry with you the element of respect.
Thank you, Veronica. And as I'm prone to say, this concludes the interesting part of the broadcast. And if you want to find more information, of course, aprilcrawford.com, go to amazon.com and search April Crawford, and the free newsletter, try innerwhispers.net. Thank you. Until next time.